Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Team 7 got back together for a mission. For generations Team 7 has produced some of the greatest shinobi of their age. Their legendary feats molded not only Konoha but the entire shinobi world into what it is, for better or worse. They say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but it's the road to heaven that goes through hell. Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 1, Prologue. Location, Degarashi Port, Land of Water. Time, 6:14 p.m. The two men dragged their helpless prisoner through the streets of the market. The crowd hastily made way for them, keen to avoid their attention. A few of them looked appalled, some looked outraged, some merely indifferent, but most of them were scared and were busy trying to make themselves scarce, lest they incur the wrath of the enforcers. The men for their part looked supremely confident in their power and authority. Safe in the knowledge that their aura of invincibility was maintained and sustained by their acts of suppressing these random acts of dissent. Their victim was a lad who hadn't probably even seen 18 summers yet. His crime had been his refusal to pay the mandatory protection money their establishment, for the lack of a better term, charged for their, well, protection. Some of them just didn't understand the service they provided. Some of the misguided ones, like the one they were dragging with them right now, openly defied them. Hence, the need to make an example. The rebellion, no matter how small, had to be put out before it was fanned out of control. After all, a new establishment like their own couldn't afford to let these things pass. Even a year ago they were just one of the dozens of gangs trying to control this port town. 8 months ago the place had resembled a war zone, with the streets turning into battlefields. And just when it seemed the gangs would implode within themselves, came Kenshin Homura. That was the name he claimed anyway. He approached their boss for a job as an enforcer. What happened next would be written in blood in the annals of the town's dark history. The man single-handedly tore through the ranks of the rival gangs. He had cleared the streets within a month and firmly established the dominion of their boss. How he had done it remained as big a mystery as who he was. Rumors were that he was a ninja. But they couldn't bring themselves to care either way. Now they controlled the very economy of the port town. But their dominion was still new. And like all new things, it was fragile. The last few months of relative peace had caused the people to grow forgetful and hence, careless. Nothing like a refresher. The boy groaned piteously as he gazed up to his captors, his one eye swollen shut due to the beating he had received. "You brought it on yourself, kid," one of his captors told him. "You just had to play the hero, didn't you? Couldn't have let things be. You'll be put out of your misery soon enough," his other captor said with barely suppressed glee in his voice. "After we've had a bit of fun, of course." The men led him to a nondescript building at the edge of the town. It was a simple 2-story structure. A year ago it was owned by a cloth merchant. During the gang wars it served as the headquarters of one of their fiercest rivals. Now it served as the place where they took out the trash, so to speak. Dragging the boy across the floor, they hung him by his arms, his feet dangling a few inches above the ground, his head collapsing forward, barely showing any signs of life. The room was soon filled with half a dozen men, the oldest being around 40. The boy had somehow regained enough consciousness to study the scene in front of him, as he helplessly raised his head. "So this is the dissenter." The oldest of them spoke, studying his captive. "He's just a kid." The quip wasn't funny at all, but the men had an active interest in keeping their boss in high spirits, chuckled heartily. "Every once in a while, one idiot thinks he can change the world," the boss continued, obviously pleased and encouraged by the reaction of his men to his witty observation. "One idiot who believes he can make a difference," he said, putting emphasis on the word idiot, "and then you have to kill him just to convince him otherwise." He shook his head in mock regret as he approached the prisoner. He was expecting some reaction from the boy, whether begging for leniency or defiance. But his men probably didn't leave him in the condition to do so. A pity. He sort of enjoyed the type. He gazed into the face of his prisoner and couldn't help but be surprised. As bloody and bruised as it was, he seemed more aware than he had any right to be. Not only that, his lone visible eye didn't show any signs of resignation or terror he had come to expect. In fact, he seemed almost bored, and seemed to regard him with the same interest one would regard a bug. He wasn't sure how he came up with that analogy, but it seemed to fit. It unnerved him a great deal. "Kill him," he ordered his men, turning away from the boy. He couldn't get away fast enough from him. He was no coward. But something about the boy turned the very blood in his veins to ice. "Sato," the boy said in a calm and clear voice. It was quiet. Almost a whisper. But in the silence of the room, it sounded like an exploding tag. The boss turned around, surprised by the clarity in the boy's voice. He wasn't looking at him. It seemed he was looking through him. Or to be more accurate, beyond him. He turned around with the intent to crack another joke about how the beating his men gave the boy had probably addled his brains. But he froze when he saw the look on the face of his right-hand man, Kenshin Homura. Kenshin was the bravest man he knew. He had seen him walk into an enemy stronghold alone and weaponless, burn the place down, killing everyone in it in the process, all without sustaining a single scratch, and yet right now his face was as pale as a ghost's. What could possibly scare the man whose exploits had earned him the moniker of the Terror of the Hidden Sea? And yet here he was frozen like a mouse in front of a viper. It was with considerable dread that the boss realized that the source of his fear was their captive. Then he murmured what would be his last coherent words. "Konoha." With a scream, Kenshin drew his tanto and in a well-executed shunshin which left his comrades baffled plunged the blade into the prisoner's ribs, stopping an inch from penetrating his heart. He just wanted to confirm his suspicions for the sake of posterity. "Were you sent to capture me?" he asked. "To capture you?" "No," the boy wheezed, his lungs flooding with blood as he pushed himself forward, driving the rest of the blade through as he brought his lips to his ear. "To kill you." The boss stood motionless, frozen in pure terror. His peripheral vision told him that his men weren't faring any better. A couple of them in fact had lost consciousness, and then a smell he associated with urine hit his senses. The warmth around his groin told him it was him. At the moment, however, he had bigger concerns. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. One moment he was with his men, joking and laughing about to execute a boy. The next moment the boy had seemingly broken free from his restraints, no signs of injury, casually wiping a blade after having removed the head of his most powerful enforcer with a single stroke. Lifting the head from the floor, ignoring the blood which had begun to flood the floor, he proceeded to place the head in a scroll. If he hadn't been so terrified, he would have wondered how the hell did the head disappear. The boy then placed the scroll in the pockets of his trousers and exited the building without so much as a backward glance. "Mission accomplished." The boy spoke into his comm link. "Target eliminated. Location, Konoha border. Time 4 p.m. Takeshi cursed under his breath as he dodged another wave of kunai. To say that the enemy had caught them by surprise would have been a gross understatement. He was a part of a 4-member patrol unit. It was meant to be a routine patrol. They had no reason to suspect anything. So when one of them was literally torn apart by a wire user, they were caught with their pants down. It was only due to the quick thinking and experience of their captain that was the only casualty they had suffered so far. After a couple of smoke bombs, a half a dozen hastily applied kawarimis and another half an hour on the run, it felt like 6, the only thing they had succeeded in was get deeper into enemy territory. Being a trap expert, his skills had kept them alive so far. Their enemy had cut off their escape the way they came. Now they were stuck taking the longer way, littered with more ambushes and traps. He was brought out of his musings by the sight of an explosive tag wrapped around a kunai embedded in a tree 5 yards in front of them. "Fire in the hole!" he hollered to warn his comrades. It was too late. He managed to change direction in time. The running momentum of his captain, however, carried him closer to the tag. The explosion nearly tore apart his eardrums. After he got over his disorientation, he could hear his female comrade shouting, "Help me, UT." He recovered enough to focus his vision to see the disheveled form of Sakura Harino, the medic on their team. Her short pink hair resembled a crow's nest, her face sported numerous cuts, a couple of kunai stuck out of her armor, but her eyes remained sharp and focused. "The captain is hurt, we need to move him fast." Takeshi nodded before taking him by the shoulder, the other taken by the girl. Together they began to build up a steady pace. "It's no good," she exclaimed. "He is crashing. Do you think we should leave him here?" Takeshi felt like an ass for coming up with that suggestion. But the fact remained, if they kept going the way they were, they wouldn't survive this. "No, I am going to treat him," she said with a no-nonsense tone. "What?" He couldn't help himself. "Are you crazy? See those outcropping of rocks?" She ignored him, pointing to a collection of rocks, about 200 yards to their right. "It will give us the high ground and enough time to save his life." "Yes, I see them. But we will be running out in the open to get there, not to mention once we are there we will be sitting ducks." "That may be, but as we are right now, we are playing right into their hands," she countered. "If we can buy ourselves enough time, maybe the reinforcements will get here before it's too late." Takeshi didn't have to think for long. He was sick of running anyway. If they had to make a last stand, guess there were worse places to do it in. "All right, we will do it your way." Soon they were camped behind the rocks. Takeshi had even found the time to set up some rudimentary traps. He kept watch as the medic in the team worked on their leader. "How is he?" Takeshi inquired. For the first time he saw the condition the captain was in. His armor was literally blown off. His right arm and leg looked like they had gone through a meat grinder. These were the wounds he could see. Thankfully the man was unconscious. He watched as Harino worked. Using a kunai she severed the jacket off his body. "He is in tachycardia," she said. "His heart is beating harder and faster than it should." She elaborated, probably catching on his confusion. "What does that mean?" "He should be going into shock due to blood loss. His heart should be slowing down, not speeding up." Sakura removed the emergency dressing she had managed on the run while unsealing a syringe from the medical scroll. "It means the shrapnel was probably laden with a toxin to make sure something like this happened." "But you can extract the poison, can't you?" Sakura removed the cap from the syringe with her mouth, revealing a 3-inch needle. She then proceeded to plunge it into his thigh. "Won't do any good," she said. "The damage has been done." Takeshi's heart sank. After all that trouble, it looked as if they were going to fail. He had already lost one comrade. He didn't want to lose another. But that was the life of a shinobi. So he was surprised to see their medic still working hard. She had unsealed an 4-line from another scroll. She tied a ribbon around her upper arm, tying a knot using her teeth. She then proceeded to heat the needle with a lighter with a bluish flame. "What are you doing?" Takeshi asked, mystified by her actions. "Right now a blood transfusion is his best chance," Sakura explained. "It might be his only chance." Now Takeshi would never claim to be a medic nin. But he did have the basic battlefield first aid and emergency care down pat. And if he wasn't mistaken, a blood transfusion between incompatible blood groups was a recipe for disaster. When he gave voice to his misgivings, Sakura merely shrugged. "My blood group is O negative, which means I can donate blood to anyone. It's not ideal, but it will have to do." She paused, before taking a deep breath as if to steady herself. "He has lost a lot of blood, and if he isn't treated he will lose more. More blood than I can spare. So what is the point of all this?" Takeshi interrupted. Sakura looked annoyed at being interrupted but continued nevertheless. "I will channel healing chakra through my blood, and if everything goes well, he should be fine. If it doesn't, he'll die, and most probably so will I," she said nonchalantly. "It's an extremely delicate procedure and would require all of my concentration. I need you to defend me. Can you do that? Have you ever done this before?" "No," she shook her head, "only Tsunade-sama has." She took a deep breath as she plunged the other end of the 4 into the captain's arm. "But she demonstrated the procedure and I know the theory, so it should be fine. Will this work?" Sakura turned to him, holding his gaze. He thought he saw a moment of indecision and uncertainty in them, but it was gone as soon as it had come. "Guess we'll find out, won't we?" She plunged the other end of the line into her own arm to start the procedure. Takeshi wasn't sure if he should be amazed or exasperated. He was probably seeing a legend in the making, or an idiot who was biting off more than she can chew. But seeing the resolute look in her eye, He couldn't help but admire her. He gave her a grim nod which she returned as she began the procedure. She wanted time, he'll make sure she gets it. Not a moment too soon as a rain of kunai started to pepper their location. Arming himself with a kunai he prepared himself for the coming onslaught. His comrades were counting on him and he couldn't afford to fail. Peering over their hiding place he could see 30 shinobi scaling the rocks to get to them. The two in the lead were barely 15 yards from them, when one of Takeshi's traps triggered itself. The explosion blew them off the cliff while slowing the rest, as they took cover. The good news was he wouldn't have to face wave after wave of enemy hordes. The bad news was that now they will switch to long-range attacks. Takeshi wasn't a chakra powerhouse by any means. He really didn't specialize in defensive ninjutsu either. His talents lay more towards the more subtle arts of ambush, tactics, and traps. He wasn't suited to a battle of attrition. But his comrades needed him and he couldn't let them down. If Haruno Sakura could risk her life to execute a procedure which if done wrong would end her life, then the least he could do was buy her enough time to pull it off. He moved himself away from where Sakura was treating the captain. He must draw the fire away from them. They needed a target. He will provide them with one. Palming 5 kunai between his fingers he scoured the area. He couldn't see anyone at the moment. At the same time he knew he couldn't afford to let them dictate terms of this engagement. Wrapping a couple of exploding tags around 2 of the kunai he threw them where he saw them set themselves up. The screams of alarm and pain told him that he had at least succeeded partially. Leaving his cover for a brief second to allow them a visual he ran through the hand seals for the bunshin and had them running in different directions. The E-ranked technique had almost been rendered obsolete, he however hoped that the confusion and chaos of the battle should help him pull off his bluff. A kunai whizzed an inch past his ear, he could barely suppress his smirk as he felt his plan succeeding. He could feel them closing the distance. They would be on him any second now. Whipping out another kunai he cut a wire to trigger a prearranged trap. He hit the ground placing his hands over his head as a mass of kunai flew over his head. He felt them avoid the wave, just for them to trigger another trap. This one involved explosive tags. Takeshi flipped backwards to get away from the blast radius. He held his stance as he waited to see the results of his efforts through the veil of dust and smoke. It wasn't his best work. His traps tended to be more elaborate than that. But it was all he could do with the constraints of time and resources. He cursed under his breath when he saw an earth wall surrounding the enemy. One of them was holding his arm trying to staunch a bleeding and throwing him a murderous look. By the looks of it his injury wasn't serious enough to put him out of the fight. Feeling a presence behind him, he ducked a tanto, which would have taken off his head, now only managed a few strands of his hair. He kicked the swordsman away and tried to get some distance between them, except he was now moving closer to the 2 shinobi who he had just tried to blow away. He felt a kick to his head which made him see stars. He tried to reach for another kunai, but the enemy was having none of it. A wire wrapped around his hand and pulled back, flipping him on his back. Spikes of earth rose where he landed, one pierced his arm and another sprouting from his thigh, effectively pinning him to the ground. He nearly blacked out from the pain. When he finally came to his senses, he saw 3 figures looking down on him. 2 of them were masked, while the third was a woman with dark eyes and hair with a rather peculiar shade of blue. She was dressed in a green outfit with a red turtleneck and brown fingerless gloves. Judging by the deference with which the masked shinobi were treating her, she was the leader. Their headbands had a musical note on them. His throat felt raw. Which meant he probably screamed his vocal cords off. Oto. They were supposed to have been disbanded. Well, looks like we've captured ourselves a tree hugger. The woman spoke, a mocking edge to her voice. A nice hole you rats found for yourself. Now only if we could get the rest. You wouldn't happen to know where the rest of your team is, would you? Takeshi glared hatefully at the man, panting heavily, before spitting in her face. The woman casually wiped the gob of spit from her face. Well, I guess plan B it is, ... She then proceeded to plunge a kunai in his kneecap, getting another scream out of him. You are wasting your time. Takeshi gasped between his words. I'm not telling where they are. The woman studied Takeshi with a look of mock puzzlement. You think I am torturing you to get you to tell me where your comrades are? She said, amusement lacing her voice. Your stupidity continues to amaze me. You Konoha so big on comradeship, the will of fire. So ready to die for your people. Did it ever occur to you that as you would die for your comrades will die for you too? Realization struck Takeshi with the force of a biju. He was being used to get the rest out. He saw her smile as she comprehended the horror of her captive. So where were we? She twisted the kunai in his knee as his screams filled the air. Stop! A female voice shouted. The woman torturing Takeshi turned to the source of the voice. She studied the girl with a seemingly academic interest. Thanks for joining the party, miss. The woman addressed Sakura. I'm afraid we started without you, but it seems you got our invitation. Well, better late than never. Though I can't help but notice the guest list isn't quite complete. He is dead. Sakura said shortly, seemingly not keen on playing games. A part of Takeshi was really relieved that Sakura had come. He didn't know how much more of that he could take. Another part felt ashamed of that part. Now instead of just him dying, Sakura would too, and so will the captain. If he wasn't dead already. You people are predictable. She whined impatiently. It'd have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. At an unseen signal, a couple of Otonin approached Sakura from behind with the intent to capture her, but they had underestimated the medic. She ducked under them, then proceeded to execute a leg sweep, catching them off balance. In the blink of an eye, she had the two acting as meat shields for her, with her kunai at their throats. How is that for unpredictable? Sakura said, a mocking edge to her tone now. Takeshi couldn't help being amazed at this turnaround. They just might get out of this alive. The woman, after a moment of stunned silence, started laughing hard. I must admit, she conceded once she had her amusement under control. You are more interesting than I expected. So this is how it's going to work, Sakura said, ignoring the woman. You're going to let my comrade go, in return for one of yours. We're going to hold on to one for insurance, till we are safely out of here. The woman studied Sakura like a poker player who knew she had the best hand in the house and was just playing along her opponent's bluff to raise the stakes. Takeshi knew that look. He had seen it one time too many during games night in the Chunin lounge. That's how he knew they were screwed. With a wave of her hand, she ordered the nin holding the Doton Jutsu, pinning him to the ground, to release it. The woman grabbed him by the collar and pulled him to his feet, completely disregarding his pain, the smile never leaving her face. She pushed him forward towards Sakura. He barely registered the look of satisfaction on Sakura's face as she saw her gamble being pulled off. Then slowly it turned to one of horror. Takeshi didn't get it. What had happened? He looked behind to see what was causing his comrade so much distress. The enemy hadn't moved. The group of Otonin were holding their place. The woman was still holding him up, her arms supporting his back, smirk in place. Except it wasn't an arm anymore. It was a pink crystal shard, going through his back and now protruding out of his chest. His vision darkened as he coughed out blood. He didn't even register the pain as he faded into oblivion. Location, Iwagakure, Chunin Exams Stage 2, Day 3. Venue, the Valley of Lost Souls. Time, 2 a.m. Katashi rubbed his arms to generate some warmth for his body. He hated to be the last one on watch. But unfortunately, he had drawn the short straw. He suspected the game had been, he knew exactly who to blame. Too bad he couldn't prove it. He sighed helplessly as he waited for dawn to break. It had been a long 4 days. Actually, that wasn't right, it had been a long month. It all began when their Jonin-sensei decided to nominate them for the Chunin exams barely 6 months after they had graduated the academy. He remembered the day their sensei had announced the news. Kai, their third teammate, had lost his balance painting the second-floor window of a client's house during one of those dreaded D-ranked missions. The idiot had landed on his ass and broken his tailbone. The doctor put him out of action for 6 weeks, followed by a month of rehabilitation, effectively putting him out of contention for participation in the exams and by extension the entire team. Just when they had thought to have said goodbye to their chances of having been the youngest team to compete in the Chunin exams in almost a decade, their sensei had found them a replacement in the form of an older genin who went by the name of Naruto Uzumaki. He had joined their team a couple of weeks before the start of the exams. He looked about 16, which put him quite a few years ahead of them. If there was one word he would use to describe him, it would be loud. Everything about him, from his golden locks to mischievous blue eyes to his clothes with a high ratio of orange, screamed at him. Even when he talked, he managed to be loud, even though he wasn't shouting. If that wasn't enough, he had whisker birthmarks on his cheeks. He didn't know what he had been expecting when he was told they would be joined by a veteran genin. But it sure wasn't this. To make matters weirder, he was the goofiest guy he had ever come across. Even more so than Konoha Sarutobi, the class clown in his batch. That probably explained why he hadn't been promoted till now. It was almost an unwritten rule that if you didn't get promoted within the first 2 years after graduating, you were unlikely to go far in your career as a shinobi. Uzumaki Naruto seemed to be one of those people who had hit that wall and now found it insurmountable. In short, he was a washout. He had shared his concerns with the female member of their team, Miyuki. She had been more optimistic about this addition than he had been. "You seem to be overlooking the fact that he has survived so far," she told him when he brought it up during a sparring session. "If nothing else, his experience should count for something." After that, he stopped sharing his concerns with his ex-classmate and now teammate. Experience or not, he would take Kai over him any day. Or someone, hell, anyone whose manner didn't scream incompetence. But it was the best they could do in such short notice. Over the next week and a half, they trained together and ran D-ranked missions to get some semblance of familiarity with each other. That's when he discovered another strange thing about Uzumaki. The older genin wasn't only competent in the D-ranked missions, he excelled in them and actually seemed to enjoy them too. No one enjoyed D-ranked missions. Even Miyuki had been mystified by his enthusiasm, and when she had voiced her curiosity, he had stared at her for a full 30 seconds, his face losing its goofy nature to be replaced by a thoughtful one. His answer had been left them even more curious about the enigmatic blonde. "It's good, honest work. Something of a rarity in our world. What's not to like?" he had said, before reverting back to his goofy persona. So when the time finally came for their departure, which in itself raised more questions as both his and Miyuki's families had taken time to see them off and wish them luck, but not a single well-wisher had made time for Uzumaki. Maybe because he had none, and for the first time he found himself feeling sorry for his temporary teammate, a sentiment apparently shared by his teammate. He sighed wearily. To top it all, as much as it rankled him, the blonde genin had been the reason they were even in the second round. If there ever had been any doubt about his usefulness, they had been dispelled in the very first stage of the exams. If they had followed Katashi's directions, they would have jumped off a cliff, possibly to their deaths and definitely to disqualification. Their arrival had been relatively mundane. Though he had to admit the history books didn't do justice to the sheer size and majesty of the place. Iwa was a valley surrounded by mountains which made Mount Hokage look like an eroded plateau. There was little greenery and most of the houses and buildings were made of red stone, aiming for practicality rather than aesthetics. The visiting teams were settled in their community center, which had temporarily been turned into a living space for over 70 teams of genin from 5 major and 15 minor villages. Despite being the greatest ninja village, Konoha had thought it was prudent to send only one team. It wasn't all that surprising considering the history between Konoha and Iwa. The living conditions weren't ideal, but considering the fact they were to spend only one night there, none of them minded them particularly. The next day they had been directed by one of the officiating Chunin to proceed to the village square. 216 genin lined up in groups of 3 representing the pride of their respective villages. The experience was a moment of great humility for them. From there they had been led up on Mount Kamaizuru, named after the clan of their first Chuchikage. Once they reached the top of the cliff, they were instructed to stand on an elevated platform over 600 feet in length and made to face the cliff, in a single file, a distance of 2.5 feet between them. He remembered breaking into cold sweat when he had actually dared to peer over the edge of the precipice. At least he had his teammates with him. Welcome to Stage I of the 25th Chunin exams. Their proctor, a big man wearing a red jacket and black trousers, standard attire for Iwajan, and addressed the gathering after joining them on the platform. My name is Hibiki Kyuzo and I will be your proctor for this portion of the exam. He paused, letting his words sink in. A Chunin is a leader. They must be courageous, resourceful, pragmatic, and most importantly, decisive. He paced along the row of nervous genin. A Chunin must know exactly when to proceed and even more importantly know when to cut their losses and retreat. This test has been designed to test these very qualities. Pass and you proceed to the next round. He stared into the eyes of the genin. Katashi gulped audibly. Failure will result in instant elimination. The way he said the last word had sent a shiver down his spine. At the ends of the platform you are standing on you can see two genin. Katashi spied Miyuki, risking a glance to confirm the proctor's word. She wasn't the only one, as several heads were now swiveling in either direction to sate their very human curiosity. They are the ones holding this platform using an earth jutsu. He paused again for dramatic effect. All you need to do to complete this section of the exam is, jump off the platform. Katashi never thought he would describe silence as deafening, but that's exactly how he would describe the one that followed this declaration. Slowly as the genin got over their shock, pandemonium broke out. The accumulated genin threw out shouts of indignation and outrage as they protested the rules. Silence! The proctor roared over the din, causing everyone to go quiet immediately. Those are the rules, and you will abide by them. Katashi froze in his place. He couldn't believe this. He was being told to jump to his death? Next to him Miyuki's face had gone white. How could they do this? Was this Iwa's way to cut out the competition? Suddenly the honor of being nominated to participate in the Chunin exams didn't seem like an honor. Maybe it was Konoha's way to weed out the weak from their ranks. Suddenly even Uzumki's presence in their ranks was beginning to make sense. After all, he was a career genin without a family or friends. His death won't mean anything in the grand scheme of things. What if we decide not to jump? A genin from Kusa inquired. The proctor's brutal face broke into a smile. A smile which bore no goodwill for their recipient. You will be given 10 seconds to make the decision, after which the jutsu will be released and the platform will collapse. His grin turned even more sadistic as he said the next words. Your time starts now. 10, 9. A group of genin to his right immediately jumped off the cliff. 8, 7. The first group was soon copied and several others decided to follow their example. 6, 5. Maybe he should be jumping too. He had heard things about the first stage during the Konoha Chunin exams. He recalled hearing how the proctor had threatened the end of the careers of the participating genin if they failed to answer a question. The participating genin were given the option of foregoing the question altogether to save their careers. Eventually the ones who had stayed to participate had been passed. 4, 3. Maybe that's what this was. A test of their courage in the face of the unknown. Moreover, they won't kill people in the first stage of the exam. That came later. His resolve strengthening, he prepared himself to launch himself off the cliff. 2, 1. Just as he was about to, a hand grabbed his shoulder and with surprising strength pulled him back away from the cliff, backward off the platform. As soon as his feet left the platform it collapsed, taking the rest of the candidates with it. That. He turned to face the sunny visage of Uzumaki Naruto, his hand still firm on his shoulder. Wasn't very smart of you. Katashi turned to see approximately 20 teams had gotten off the platform. Miyuki was on her knees breathing heavily. Congratulations, they were greeted by the voice of their proctor as he surveyed the remaining candidates. On passing stage I. Instructions for the next stage will be given shortly. He had been a little out of it when it had been explained why they had been passed, trying to get his heartbeat in control. He was pretty sure the gist had been that the stupid people jumped into the cliff, the indecisive ones stayed on the platform till it collapsed while the ones who passed jumped off the platform, but backwards. There had been a lot of explanation regarding how the decisions Chunins made on the field were life and death, and consequences of a wrong decision can be disastrous. You actually figured all that out, Miyuki? Asked Naruto, having followed the words of the proctor. Not really, the older genin had said, rubbing the back of his head, a sheepish grin playing on his lips. The scary proctor told us to jump off the platform. I just thought it'd be pretty stupid to actually jump off the cliff. At this, Katashi tried hard to fight down the blush threatening to color his cheeks. "Thanks for the save, senpai," Miyuki said to Naruto, who just laughed and rubbed her head, earning a blush from the girl. Even Katashi managed to mutter a thanks once he got over his mortification. "Do you think they're dead?" Katashi inquired regarding the fates of the genin who had disappeared down the cliff. "I doubt it," Naruto replied. "They must have some protective mechanism for making sure they lived. They really wouldn't want to start a war, I think." "What do you mean, senpai?" Miyuki said, puzzled. "We're shinobi," Naruto had offered as a way of explanation. His relief at having survived the first round of the exams overcame any uneasiness he might have felt at that statement. They were led from the mountain to a valley on the other side. The valley was completely barren and uninhabited, stretching for leagues. "What you are seeing in front of you is the Valley of Lost Souls," their proctor explained. "Before the time of the great villages, this used to be a thriving market for the land of iron. Unfortunately, it met its untimely end during one of the most brutal battles of the First Shinobi War. Consequently, as you can see, what was once a symbol of the pinnacle of our civilization is nothing more than a barren wasteland now." His words had been surprisingly regretful. "And today it will serve as your battlefield." So, that's what had brought them here. All the teams had been given a red banner. Their objective was to find the 5 checkpoints in the valley. They were supposed to tie each banner on a designated spot and in return would gain another one, which held clues to the next checkpoint and so on. Sounded simple enough. Except with everything that came with being a shinobi, this too came with a huge catch. The final checkpoint will reveal itself only on the noon of the 5th day. After which they will have a window of only 10 minutes to place their banners. The banners which remained at the end of the window will determine who qualifies for the final round. With rules like that, bloodshed was guaranteed. Katashi had been of the opinion that they race through the course, get to the final checkpoint and set up an ambush for the rest. Naruto had immediately overruled that. "First off, you aren't the only one who has come up with that brilliant plan. I am sure others have thought of it too," he told him when Katashi had protested being overruled. "Secondly, the checkpoint isn't going anywhere. Rushing in will only end up tiring us out." So, they had gone with the slow and steady approach. They had just gotten their 3rd banner. So it could be said that they were on schedule. He was brought out of his musings when he felt a sharp jab to his ribs. "You are a lousy lookout, you know that," came the irritated voice of his female teammate. "I knew it was you," Katashi lied, trying to get his heart rate to slow and trying to keep his voice from quivering. "Couldn't sleep. Yeah, I just keep expecting for something to go wrong." Miyuki removed the kunai from his neck and walked around to take a seat opposite to him. Despite the chilly night, they had refrained from making a bonfire. The reason being it would have just acted as a beacon to all the other candidates announcing their position. Being warm and comfortable just didn't seem like a good enough reason for getting their throats slit. "We have made it this far, haven't we?" Katashi assured her. "We will be fine." Miyuki smiled at his effort to make her feel better, but it just didn't reach her eyes. "So what do you think of senpai?" she asked, causing warning bells to go off in Katashi's head. He wouldn't claim to be an expert, but he could tell what a question like that meant. Miyuki had never been one of those girls who took an active interest in boys. She was hard-working and skilled enough to have been one of the best graduates in the academy that year. She was in fact unrivaled in accuracy and a very good support and long-range specialist. The hint of admiration which entered her tone despite her obvious attempt to hide it, was a dead giveaway. Something that irritated Katashi for some reason. But before he could answer, his ears were filled with a strange buzzing sound. "Do you hear that?" Miyuki went on guard, palming her kunai. "Oh my god." With dawning horror, Katashi realized the danger they were in. It was bees, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, surrounding them. "Wake up, Naruto. We have to get out of here," he ordered Miyuki while running through hand seals to apply a genjutsu. Miyuki went to the lump on the ground that was Naruto a few yards away, wrapped inside a sleeping bag with the intention of waking him up, when a kunai wrapped with an explosive tag landed a yard in front of her, right next to him. Reflexes ingrained into her due to years of training moved her body away from the blast. Senpai! She screamed helplessly for her fallen comrade. She tried to get to her feet, when killing intent the likes of which she had never felt in her young life flooded the area. She couldn't move, paralyzed by the fear enveloping the very blood in her veins like poison. Her body broke into a cold sweat as the sound of buzzing came nearer. But no. A defiance brought out by desperation pushed itself out of her. She will not die here. She moved her body just in time to avoid the first wave of bees. Her senses began to work overtime as she flattened herself on the ground. The killing intent was still permeating the area, but it wasn't paralyzing her the way it had a few seconds ago. Their enemy had yet to show themselves, so they were entirely on the defensive. A hand found its way to hers and pulled her to her feet. It was Katashi with a sleeping bag over his head to protect himself from the killer bees. "Where is Naruto?" he questioned. Miyuki shook her head and Katashi swore under his breath. "I placed a genjutsu on the bees," he said, trying to explain the situation. "It's probably the only thing that is keeping them from attacking us. So what do? We need fire. But unfortunately I don't know any fire jutsus. But we can create fire," Miyuki muttered. "I have an idea." She opened her bag and studied the inventory. She had a flint, 8 explosive tags, 16 kunai, 3 sets of shuriken, a spool of ninja wire 30 feet in length and other knickknacks. Textbook shinobi survival kit. But there was only one thing that she needed right now. Reaching for the explosive tags, she took a kunai and went to work. "Are you crazy?" Katashi exclaimed on seeing what she was trying to do. "You are going to blow us up." "SSHHH. Miyuki shushed him impatiently. "I know what I'm doing." At least she hoped so. Katashi was right to be wary. Explosive tags were volatile in the most controlled of situations. This was anything but. Her brother had shown her how to deactivate an explosive tag. Most people thought that explosive tags were nothing but compressed chakra exploding. Nothing could be farther from the truth. An explosive tag was nothing but a storage seal, with different layers. Each layer acting like a storage scroll would, containing a component of the explosive. During activation, all a ninja has to do is channel some chakra into the tag to unlock the seals, allowing the components to mix to form the deadly mixture which then acted as an explosive. So all she had to do was break one of the seals and drag the component out of it without breaking the rest. In this case, the highly flammable accelerant. Theoretically, it was simple. Practically, not so much. One mistake and the accelerant would flow into the seal instead of outside of it and would result in exactly what Katashi feared. But they had no choice. "How long will your genjutsu last?" Miyuki asked her teammate while working on her third tag. "About that," Katashi ventured tentatively. "I have good news and bad news." "Hit me." "The good news is my genjutsu seems to be working just fine." "The bad news?" "It isn't supposed to." Miyuki froze as she heard the grim tone of his voice. "What do you mean?" "What I mean is that those bees. They are not wild." Katashi's face was ashen. "They are summons." The uncertain terror in Miyuki's gut solidified to take a more concrete shape. Summoning was a high-level skill used by high-level ninjas. Whoever was targeting them were anything but genin level. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, she steeled herself. "One problem at a time," she said, "we need to get rid of those bees first." She had deactivated 3 of her tags to get enough accelerant for her purpose. It had taken only 30 seconds to make a makeshift flamethrower using the rest of her supplies. Using the flint to spark a flame, she used the accelerant to fuel it and aimed the flame at the summons. For a second she wondered what she looked like with flames seemingly coming out of her hands. It seemed to be working too. The bees seemed to scatter in front of the dreaded fire. Just when it looked like they would be out of danger, another wave of killing intent washed over them. This one was even stronger than the last one. It actually brought them to their knees. She saw visions of her own death. She saw herself lying on the floor bleeding to death, while Katashi lay disemboweled next to her, the stench of decay and rot permeating the air. "Pathetic." A male voice reached her ears, dripping with disdain. "Gotta admit they did well to survive the bees, but this seems to be the end of line." Stop playing with them, hero. Another voice broke in. Just put them out of their misery so we can move on. Fine, but you are no fun. The other said in a resigned tone. As she heard those words she gained some clarity. She could see the two figures standing casually in front of them, without a care. Why shouldn't they? They had already killed one of them, and the other two were too helpless to do anything. She could see Katashi throwing up next to her. Don't worry. Their tormentor said in a soothing voice. This will be over soon. She saw the trajectory of the kunai thrown their way. There were two of them. One for each. It would impale her forehead. She saw it coming. Any resistance or defiance would be futile. She won't survive this. She felt a tug of chakra on her body. The kind she felt when she used the kawarimi. But she wasn't using the jutsu. Though she didn't fight it and let her body go with the flow. Soon she felt arms around her shoulders as they dragged her away. A part of her wondered if the enemy decided to capture her. Maybe cut open her body and take whatever secrets they can glean off it. Though she didn't know what secrets they could possibly glean out of a genin-level shinobi with no Kekai Genkai. Is she going to be okay? A voice she didn't think she would ever hear again said. Don't know, she seems to be in shock. Might need to give her some time. Came the same voice again. Was he talking to himself? Miyuki, he said as if trying to calm a scared animal. I need a sign from you to tell me if you can hear me. Squeeze my hand. A hand moved into hers. After some coaxing she managed to return the grip. She is responsive. The voice was now filled with relief. I think it is now safe to do this. Suddenly warmth flowed back into her body. The terror leaving her like the darkness which retreats to the shadows when the sun rises. Her shallow breaths turned deeper. That's right, breathe. The voice encouraged. You're gonna be okay. Slowly but surely her vision came back to focus on the sunny visage of Uzumaki Naruto. I thought you were dead. She gasped. Well, all evidence to the contrary, he smiled at her reassuringly. Her relief at surviving and joy at seeing him alive finally overcame her, and her hands found their way around the blonde's neck and she was sobbing on his shoulders. The older boy seemed to hesitate for a few seconds before returning the embrace. All this time she hadn't known how much bigger Naruto was than her. In his arms she felt like a little kid. He was warm and smelt of pine and earth. There was something both honest and comforting about it. There, it's going to be all right. He gently stroked her hair trying to calm her down, but she only held on tighter. She didn't know how long she had been in his arms, but after a while she finally recovered enough to extricate her arms from around his neck. Are you going to be all right? He asked her, looking concerned. She just nodded in response, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. That's when she doubled back when something caught her eye. A few yards away, she saw two more Narutos arguing in hushed tones over the unconscious form of Katashi. There are three of you. She deadpanned. Yeah. The Naruto with her laughed sheepishly, rubbing the back of his head. None of us is the boss, if that's what you are wondering. The boss? We are shadow clones. She would have persisted with her questions, except now she had bigger concerns. Is he going to be okay? She made her way to the unconscious boy. He had an allergic reaction to the bee stings. But don't worry, he has been given a dose of epinephrine and some follow-up chakra therapy, so he should be fine once he sleeps it off. Something still seemed to be bothering her that she couldn't put her finger on. It must be her recent ordeal which must have put her in this state. If you guys are clones. She ventured tentatively. Where's the real one? All three clones froze for a second and then shrugged at the same time. Something she found both creepy and fascinating. She had never seen clones act so independently from their user. Well, it seems like the boss is done. One of the clones tending to Katashi said. Done with what? Miyuki asked, even more mystified. You'll see, the clone with her replied before helping her to her feet. Come on, let's go. Confused but managing to hold her tongue, Miyuki simply followed the group of blondes. Katashi had finally regained consciousness but had to be by the clones supported to be able to walk. He didn't look in good shape, but at least he was alive. She saw him crouched on the ground checking over a body. She recognized the place as where they had set up camp. In the light of the breaking dawn it looked almost like a different place. "Hey boss." The clone escorting Miyuki greeted him. "We got them." The original Naruto. Or at least she assumed it was the original, looked up and his face broke into a relieved smile when he saw them. "You're okay." He grinned. "Thanks guys, I owe you one." "Anytime boss." The three clones chorused before dismissing themselves in identical bursts of smoke. "Did you do all this?" Katashi said, slightly slurring his words. "Yeah, I did." Naruto replied matter-of-factly. "You took out all three of them?" Miyuki inquired, amazement coloring her tone. She saw the three bodies lying in various degrees of distress. One of them was lying a few yards away, who from the looks of it had his neck broken. Another had his chest caved in, by what could have been a meat grinder, his eyes open in shock and terror. The third one could have been mistaken for being asleep if not for the thin line of red running across his neck. Then she studied Naruto. Other than a few scrapes, he didn't even look like he had been in a fight. When she thought about how outclassed she and Katashi were last night, the feat seemed even more impressive. Forget about fighting, they couldn't even stay on their feet. For the first time since she chose this life, she was beginning to doubt her resolve to be a shinobi. "Stop blaming yourself," Naruto addressed her, seemingly reading her mind. "There's no way you were ready for this kind of opponent." "But they're genin too." Miyuki couldn't keep the hurt of her voice. She knew she had been outclassed, but to be told so by the object of her admiration was another thing entirely. "Are you sure?" he asked her. "Take a look again." More than a little perplexed, Miyuki obeyed, and studied the bodies again. At first she wondered what he was talking about. But slowly it began dawning to her. "They are too old," Katashi said, joining the conversation, before realizing what he had said. He gave Naruto an apologetic look, who merely waved it off. Miyuki winced at his bluntness but agreed. They were old. Older than even Naruto. These guys looked to be in their 20s. "Correct, but that's not what I was talking about," Naruto said approvingly before approaching a body and ripping off the sleeve of one of the dead, revealing a tattoo of the symbol of the hidden stone village. "Congratulations my young friends, last night you had the honor of being targeted by the Iwambu." "What?" Miyuki exclaimed after getting over the shock of that statement. "Why would Umbu attack us?" "Whenever a village hosts exams, it makes sure to send in a ringer team to get rid of the competition," Naruto explained. "After all, the host village needs to look better than everyone else. This is their way of doing it." "But isn't that illegal or something?" Katashi said, not being able to help himself. At this Naruto burst into peals of laughter. He must have continued for a minute or so before finally managing to control himself, heaving lungful of air. "You almost managed to succeed where the Iwambu failed, kid," Naruto said, causing Katashi's face to go red with mortification. "If you're gonna worry about legalities, you're in the wrong line of work, my friend." "But what if we expose what has been done here?" Miyuki ventured. "You'll be dead before you can say the words cheater." Naruto used air quotes to emphasize the words. "Surviving is victory here. Take what you can." "So should we continue the exams?" Katashi said, his voice full of uncertainty. "No, the exams are over as far as we are concerned." Miyuki wasn't sure if she should be relieved or disappointed. It wasn't just because of what she had gone through, but suddenly her entire worldview seemed to have changed. She found herself questioning things she had taken for granted, and now she wasn't sure if she wanted to walk this road anymore. Her eyes met Naruto's and she could see no pity, only understanding. "Why are you still a genin?" Katashi asked with an accusatory stare at the older genin. "If you can take out a team of Umbu single-handedly, forget Chunin, you should have been a jonin. Strength and power don't determine whether you are promoted or not." "Then what does?" A smile broke into Naruto's face, quite unlike his usual ones. This one actually reached his eyes, if only to reveal the melancholy in them. "I'm sure you'll tell me when you're promoted." Chapter 1, You Have Been Hired. Location, Umbu Headquarters. The figure landed exactly 20 yards from the front gate, in keeping with the standard protocol. If he had been even so much as an inch closer, they would have been using his roasted remains as visual aid to teach new cadets what became of hotshots who tried to push the envelope a little too far. Then again, he wasn't much for caution. As he walked in, he knew, even though his body didn't register any change, that his chakra had been locked. A result of the elaborate fuinjutsu seals that lined the entire compound. Understandable. It was after the Umbu HQ after all. Konoha's temple for all things related to its intelligence. It was the foundation on which Konoha stood strong, mighty and invincible. Everything from the priorities of missions to details of Black Ops and strategic assets were processed here. A brainchild of the Daime Hokage, it was now entering its 77th year. Anyone wanting to cripple Konoha would have to look no further for a target. Removing or even damaging the foundation would lead to its collapse. Sounded really simple, right? It wasn't. The security around this place would make the one around the Hokage Tower look like Konoha markets on Trader's Day, though in entirely different ways. While the Hokage Tower was a fortress, nigh impregnable, Umbu HQ was more akin to a black hole. You will get in, but you sure as hell won't be getting out. Not before the guys in the TNI department were done with you anyway. After which your dead remains will be going to the morgue for incineration, of course. The locking of chakra was just the preliminary measure. It was something he discovered on his own. He had discovered at least a dozen more, he was sure there were hundreds. Sometimes in his free time he tried to frame scenarios where he was the enemy trying to infiltrate the place. None of them ended particularly well for him. He walked to the first checkpoint, where he rolled up his sleeves to reveal his Umbu tattoo on his upper left forearm. The leaf symbol on his arm was a simple enough design and could be replicated by anyone with half a brain, except it really wasn't just a tattoo. It was his identity card. Each one was unique in its own way, and trying to replicate one would not only be futile but incredibly stupid. The man manning the post scanned it once before waving him in. He passed through half a dozen more of these checkpoints. The entire process took 15 minutes. The place was similar to the Konoha mission desk in some ways. The same basic plan. But the difference was like night and day. An apt analogy. While the Konoha mission desk catered mainly to civilian clients, this was where the real action was. Matters related to Konoha's security only. Mission difficulty started from A ranks and only got higher. Almost everything was classified. Rumor had it that the office of the Hokage itself wasn't in on half of what went on in here. The cool ambience coupled with the grey walls gave the place an oppressive aura contrary to the more friendly mission desk. This place was Konoha's dark side given shape. He handed his mission scroll to the man manning the desk, who barely registered its contents, heads of 3 B-ranked missing nins. 2 from Kusa, and 1 from Kumo. It had taken him the better part of a month to track and kill them. The man made some entries into a register. This info would be circulated and used to update the bingo books. It was a cumbersome process, but it needed to be done. After collecting his paycheck, he proceeded to the lockers. The locker room was attached to the showers, something he really needed. Most lockers had the personalized touch of their owners. Some made shrines of their loved ones, others used theirs for keeping secrets from their loved ones. In here you could learn a lot about the men and women behind the masks if you just kept your eyes open. Some even kept photos of celebrities they admired. His, however, was more bare bones than the others. It wasn't personalized in any way, housing only the bare essentials. A change of civilian clothes and his spare uniform were all it contained at the moment. He removed his mask and was about to reach for the clothes when he felt a familiar presence behind. "You're losing your touch, Kakashi," he observed dryly as he slammed his locker shut and turned around to see the man leaning on the lockers a few yards away from him. The silver-haired Cyclopes casually turned a page of his book as he spoke. "Or maybe you just got better," he said, "though I have to ask, were you just fishing for compliments?" Sasuke rolled his eyes. He couldn't believe he walked into that one. He could never get the best of Kakashi in a verbal duel. The man was craftier than a fox and more slippery than a serpent. "Why are you here?" he settled for asking. While Kakashi hadn't officially been a part of Umbu for years, he was still engaged with them as a consultant, giving him enough reasons to be here. A fact, which never failed to irk him. "You wound my heart, Sasuke-kun," Kakashi said, still leafing through his book, and here I was thinking you would have missed your old sensei. Sasuke had to admit, grudgingly even to himself, the man was a master at pissing people off. A talent which he suspected served the man rather well in the battlefield. He bet his opponents were too pissed and annoyed at him to be thinking clearly while facing him. The reason why Kakashi was still here and his opponents were not. His own irritation was so great that he barely registered that the man had used his real name, a fact which went strictly against protocol. One of these days I am going to slit your throat in your sleep, he threatened. I'd be worried if you knew where I slept, Kakashi remarked. As for why I am here? I am here to offer you a job. Sasuke raised an eyebrow skeptically. I already have a job. I'm offering you a better one. Kakashi shut his book and tossed him a scroll, which he caught. Despite himself, Sasuke opened the scroll, burning with curiosity. A quick look through it and he shut the scroll to toss it right back at his former sensei. Not interested, he said curtly. Why not? I work alone. Teams aren't my thing. Part of the reason he took this job was the liberty it allowed him, and it would be a cold day in hell before he gave that up. Anything else? Kakashi asked him, concern lacing his voice, which could easily be mistaken as genuine, but Sasuke knew better. However, he had been given an opening and he would exploit the shit out of it. Gee, I don't know. It couldn't be because of the fact that you're demoting me to Chunin, or the fact that you'd be leading it. Couldn't possibly be either of those, could it? He tried to lace as much sarcasm as he possibly could. Kakashi chuckled as if enjoying the antics of a misbehaving puppy. It's cute how you seem to be under the delusion that you have a choice, Kakashi said. You seem to have overlooked the fact that you're not my superior, Kakashi. Sasuke smirked. I answer to the Umbu director. I doubt he would be keen to let me go. Kakashi said nothing for a while and seemed to sigh with defeat, and Sasuke's smirk got wider, having finally got one over Kakashi. He turned around to walk away and only his reflexes stopped the projectile from hitting his face. He was puzzled. Kakashi wasn't petty enough to throw stuff out of tantrums. He studied the projectile closely and realized it was another scroll. His stomach dropped. It had the official seal of the Umbu director, which could only mean one thing. Is it your relieving letter? Kakashi chirped cheerfully. Yes, it is. The Umbu thanks you for your services. Sasuke couldn't believe this was happening. He had nightmares which started like this. Maybe this was one too. Any moment now he would wake up and forget about all this. You're not dreaming, Sasuke-kun, Kakashi said, his words barely being registered through the haze of Sasuke's shock. Training Ground 7, Friday 9 a.m. sharp. See you then. Kakashi walked away from Sasuke, giving the boy time to process his fate. One down, he said to himself, 3 to go. Location: Konoha General Hospital. So, I told her if it bothered her so much she should just avoid her, you know. The elderly woman said, I mean, if she spent a fraction of the time bothering me telling her how she exactly felt about her, she wouldn't be in this mess now, would she? You know what I mean. As a matter of fact I do, Risu-san, Sakura said, smiling indulgently at the woman, while checking her blood pressure. Her current patient was a lady well into her 60s. She wasn't exactly a patient. She was just here for her weekly health checkup. For some reason she always requested Sakura. Konoha had a program where shinobi medics were required to volunteer in a civilian hospital for a preset number of hours. The idea was to establish a camaraderie not only between the shinobi medics and their civilian counterparts but also the general populace. Most of the medics she knew treated their hours with the enthusiasm of 5-year-olds faced with the possibility of eating their greens without the added advantage of knowing that it was good for them. For Sakura, however, the mundane everyday problems of the civilian populace made for a welcome change after the life and death situations she dealt with in the field. You know, Tsukun will be here next month, so maybe you could show him around, you know, the woman continued the lopsided conversation. He really doesn't know anyone here. Sakura sighed patiently. Tsukun was Risu's grandson. She was the woman's favorite topic of conversation along with her neighbors and her youngest daughter-in-law. He was a businessman who owned several casinos in the town of Tanzakugai, as Risu often bragged. Ever since striking a friendship with Sakura, she had gotten taken with the idea of setting her up with him and always seemed to be working towards that goal, not so subtly. I might not be in Konoha then, Sakura said gently, trying to sway the woman from her current line of thinking. You know how the system goes. Yes, I know. The woman said dismissively, waving her hand, while Sakura helped the woman to her feet and into her coat. She had taken off at the start of her checkup. I don't know how a nice, pretty girl like you can throw in your lot with those barbarians. Sakura laughed the woman's concerns away, not taking offense to the woman's words or correcting her perception about said demons and how she happened to be one of them. Everything looks good, Risu-san. Sakura told her patient. I will have Saburo send over your full report by tomorrow. The woman went her way, extolling the virtues of garlic which she credited to her good health, while Sakura went to the office of the senior medical officer to take her next case. Well, that's it for the day, Sakura-san, he told her. It's been a rather slow day. By the way, there is someone here waiting for you, says you are late for an appointment. Sakura grimaced. She had hoped that she would receive a pass today. Apparently, no such luck for her. She wasn't looking forward to this. She could always skip, but that would be just avoiding the problem for now in return for escalating it later. Her choice was made. I guess I will be leaving then, she told him, and getting a nod of sympathy in return at her predicament, even though he wasn't quite sure what it was. Take your time, he called after her. Take the rest of the day off, if you have to. Thanks. Sakura discarded her hospital gown and changed into her uniform before exiting the hospital premises to rendezvous with her escort, and was surprised to see her best friend. Well, look who's finally here, Ino said, her tone laced with amusement, seeing her friend in disarray. Hope you have a handy excuse, cause he wasn't happy. The old Sakura would have gone on the offensive or made up some excuse. These days, however, avoiding conflict was becoming something of a habit. He sent you to drag me to him? Sakura said a little skeptically. Oh no dear, I volunteered. Ino said unashamedly. Now let's get you there, shall we? You seem to garner a lot of pleasure from my misery. Sakura complained as she walked next to her friend, trying to prepare herself for what was to come next. You brought it on yourself. Ino countered. You missed your last 2 appointments for it. Sakura barely registered her hated nickname, as her mind wandered to the reasons she was summoned. If she had, she would have caught the concern in her friend's voice. But right now she was just walking resolutely forward, wanting it to be over. Look, I know it has been hard, but he's just trying to help, Ino told her, so cut him some slack, will you? I'll try, Sakura said, trying not to commit. You know you don't need to escort me all the way there. Hey, I'm just following orders. But I will make it up to you. Ino said unashamedly before changing tracks. How about a girls' night out? I'll see if Hinata and Tenten are free and we can all go out. Sakura bit her lip, not quite sure if she wanted to, and to make matters worse, she really didn't know how to refuse her friend either. Come on, Thursdays are ladies' night at the Blue Bar. Ino kept trying to convince her. Fine, she finally conceded, earning a hoop of celebration from Ino. Sakura couldn't help smiling. Ino's enthusiasm was infectious. Her good mood, however, plummeted a few notches, when she realized that they were finally where they needed to be. The building they were at wasn't large or imposing by any means. It was a single-floor, white structure with a cobbled pathway leading to the front door surrounded by a plush green lawn, giving it a rather pleasant aura. It was the most intimidating place in Konoha as far as Sakura was concerned. It didn't help that it stood right next to the building that housed the Konoha Torture and Interrogation Department. Well, this is it. Ino squeezed her arm once, offering comfort. Good luck. Taking a deep breath to steel herself, Sakura walked towards the building like a convict walking to their execution. The receptionist guided her to his office, whose mahogany doors were shut at the moment. Without pausing, she rattled the gold-plated knocker announcing her arrival. Enter. Came the command from inside. On entering, the first thing that greeted her was a pleasant smell, one she couldn't quite place. It was distinctively floral, but unlike any she had ever encountered. The rest of the room looked familiar. Painted light yellow, with a medium-sized desk and a few chairs. Sheaves of files and paper occupied the lone table in a state of controlled mess. In addition, there was a couch placed near the right side wall of the room. The man was the last thing that entered Sakura's line of vision. He seemed to be working on a plant. Wearing gloves, the kind gardeners wore, and diligently snapping twigs off the plant with a pair of shears. "Take a seat, Sakura-chan," the man said without bothering to turn around, "I'll be with you in a second." Sakura patiently waited for the man to finish his work. She didn't have to wait long, fortunately. Snapping his gloves off with a pleased grin, and removing his goggles, he smiled at her and waved his arm towards the plant. "So what do you think?" he asked her with the air of an artist revealing his masterpiece to the world. Sakura blinked in confusion for a couple of times before realizing he was asking for her opinion about the plant. Recovering, she studied it for a few seconds before feeling confident enough to give an opinion. "It definitely looks healthy enough," Sakura ventured, "but I must admit I've never seen flowers like that." "What is it?" "I haven't named it yet," he said, pride evident in his voice. "It has a very pleasant fragrance, doesn't it?" Sakura was impressed despite herself. Breeding a new species was a time-consuming work requiring a lot of patience and dedication. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Yes, it is," the man agreed, "but unfortunately we must now turn our attention to less pleasant subjects." Sakura grimaced, waiting to be given a dressing down. Inoichi Yamanaka, her counselor, also happened to be the father of her best friend. He had seen her grow up and he had been a part of a lot of her pleasant memories. That didn't make any of this easier though. He had taken a personal interest in her case. Something which would have been frowned upon because of his personal history with her, but he had made it happen. She still wasn't sure if she should be grateful for his consideration or insulted at his coddling. "Why did you miss your last 2 sessions?" he asked her, taking his seat on the opposite side of the table facing her. "I've been swamped at the hospital," came her automatic reply. Inoichi smiled at her, and not with disapproval or condescension. "So you've kept yourself busy," he said. "That's good thing. You've been productive despite your ordeals when it would have been so much easier to retreat within yourself." "Yeah, well, if I'm busy I'm not dwelling." Sakura shrugged. She didn't want approval for this. She didn't deserve it. Inoichi paused, evidently waiting for her to elaborate, but she kept her silent. "You moved out of your house a couple of years ago," he said after a while. "What made you take that decision?" That wasn't a hard question to answer. I'd been a Chunin for several months by then, my hours were inconvenient to say the least, it just felt like the right time. "Has that affected your relationship with your parents?" "Mother took it hard at the beginning, but she was supportive." "And your father?" "No, it didn't change anything." "What about your relationships outside your family?" "I have drifted away from most of my academy friends except Ino, though we are still cordial with each other when we meet up." The series of questions and answers continued for a while. Sakura had begun to relax when Inoichi finally closed on a topic which was a potential minefield. "You were in a relationship, I believe?" Sakura paused as she pondered over what she would say next. She had indeed been in a serious relationship. She had dated a civilian for almost a year after becoming a Chunin. He had been the son of one of her mother's friends. She had met him at a party, and one thing had led to another. He was handsome, charming, and sweet, and unlike most civilian guys wasn't intimidated by her job and status as a kunoichi. So when he had asked her to be his girlfriend, she had accepted. The first few months had been great. He was supportive and seemed to take pride in the fact that he was dating a kunoichi. But inevitably her job started to take a toll on their relationship. Her newly acquired rank and status as a medic kept her busy in the field for almost 3/4 of a month. It was getting harder and harder for them to take time out for each other. But they had been determined to make it work and tried hard to keep at it. Her last field mission had served as the final nail in the coffin, however. It wasn't working out. She tried to be nonchalant about it, but talking about it was still like getting stabbed through her heart. "We couldn't make time for each other. You broke up after you returned from your last mission, and you haven't been in the field for almost 3 months now," Inoichi said. "So, would you want to talk about the real reason?" Sakura remained silent this time. "Resolutely so. You need to talk about what happened to you sometime, Sakura," Inoichi sighed, not put off by the girl's defiance. "Keeping these things bottled up is unhealthy." "I just don't feel ready," Sakura muttered, breaking eye contact with the man. Inoichi remained silent for a while, before tearing a paper from his pad and scribbling something on it and handing it to her. Sakura realized it was an address. She looked up at him questioningly. "This is the last session you will have with me, Sakura," Inoichi said. "I'm clearing you for active duty." Sakura was shocked. This was the last thing she expected. Technically a shinobi could be cleared 3 months after having survived a traumatic mission, but she hadn't expected it. Getting back on the field wasn't something she had been dreading, but it wasn't something she felt she was ready for either. "Just like that?" she asked, thoroughly puzzled. "You have your issues, Sakura," he elaborated, "but if our sessions have told me something, it's that I can't be the one to help you. Only you can do that. Are you angry with me?" "Just the opposite. I know exactly what you are going through," he said, gesturing towards the piece of paper he had just handed her. "When you have the time, go to that address any Friday, 5 p.m. I don't have to go if I don't want to." "I wish you would," Inoichi admitted, "but no, it's completely voluntary." Sakura stared at the paper for a while before pocketing it. Sakura left Inoichi feeling rather weird. She hadn't been expecting that. Feeling a little dazed, she made her way to her apartment. She was barely halfway there, when a messenger Chunin intercepted her, handing her a scroll. The scroll carried summons from the Hokage herself. This day just got a lot more eventful than she thought it would be when she woke up this morning. Thanking the messenger, she changed her course to the Hokage Tower. The receptionist at the front desk took one look at her and waved her in, leaving her mystified as there were several others who were seated in the waiting room to meet the Hokage. 2 of the men she recognized as prominent merchants who had dealings with her family, and one looked like an official from the daimyo's court. Suddenly a cold ball of dread took shape in her abdomen. Why had she been summoned? She was a mere Chunin. Someone way down the totem pole to be even considered being granted an audience. Let alone being a priority over actual important people. She had seen the Hokage only twice. Both times it was during guest lectures that she gave to aspiring medic nins in the program. One was a theoretical lecture on the effect of various toxins on the cell membranes of various tissues. The other was a practical class where she demonstrated an extremely risky procedure involving the use of healing chakra through one's own blood. Something she had tried in her last ill-fated mission. The umbu stationed at the door opened it to allow her in. She muttered a thanks as she walked in, wondering what exactly she was walking into. The first thing that came to mind when she entered the Hokage's office was that it had one hell of a view. The right window opened out to give an excellent view of the Hokage mountain, while the left gave a panoramic view of the entire village. The room itself was simple enough, though rather tastefully furnished. Then her eyes fell on the lone occupant of the room. Tsunade Senja was a beautiful woman in her 50s who didn't look a day over 25. But that was just the physical aspect. She was also one of the most feared ninjas of the era, the greatest medic nin bar none, with a pedigree matched only by the now nearly extinct Uchiha. In her relatively short reign as the Hokage, she had proved herself to be a shrewd and effective administrator. Sakura stood there awkwardly staring at the great woman, who seemed to be engrossed in the paperwork in front of her, not even registering the additional presence in the room. Feeling she should do something, Sakura bowed from her waist. "Chunin Harano, Sakura reporting, Hokage-sama." The woman's eyes peered over the folder she had been reading to meet Sakura's. Sakura resisted the urge to gulp, and fought her shaking knees. It might have only been 3 seconds before she spoke, but to Sakura it felt closer to 3 hours. "Take a seat, Harano-san." Sakura obeyed, trying to keep her movements smooth and graceful, something she failed at as she almost knocked over a pile of files off the table. Her reflexes saved her from a greater embarrassment. Mumbling a quick apology to her leader, who ignored it altogether, she finally settled herself. "I was just going through your file," she said, indicating the folder she had been reading. "It makes for rather interesting reading material, I must say. There is a lot to like here." Sakura remained silent as the Hokage continued to talk. Excellent grades in the academy, graduated with honors as the top kunoichi at age 12. Disciplined, focused, and driven, with a keen intellect and imagination. Works well with others and shows potential as a leader, Tsunade continued, very impressive indeed. Praise from the Hokage should have been a matter of joy and pride for her, but she had a feeling this meeting wasn't a pat in the back for doing a good job. And it gets better. Participated in your first Chunin exams 6 months after graduating on the recommendation of your Jounin sensei and made it to the final round, eventually earning a field promotion a few months later, after which you joined the medical program, where again you distinguished yourself as the brightest candidate, completing the 4-year course in 2.5. I can go on and on. All your superiors have written you glowing commendations and have nothing but praise for you. Sakura could sense a but coming. So. Well, close enough. Why are you wasting your time? Sakura had walked in expecting to be reprimanded. She wasn't sure for what, but she was expecting it. But for her to be on the receiving end of one because of her achievements wasn't something she knew how to respond to. I'm afraid I don't understand, Hokage-sama, she stuttered. I read your file, up to and including your last field mission. She said, then she held up another file. She recognized it as one of those written by Inoichi containing the psychological evaluation of the shinobi returning from field duty. There is only one thing I would like to say to you: get over your pity party, kid. Sakura's jaw almost dropped to the floor, but Tsunade was on a roll now. You're not the first to lose their team on the field, and you won't be the last. Hell, this might not be the last time you lose a team. This is the world we live in, and I'm not going to coddle you and hold your hand to say everything will be alright. You're a kunoichi for Kami's sake, and I won't have you playing nursemaid to a bunch of civilian grandmothers. She paused to take a breath, cause if that's what you are going to do, I swear I will kick you off the force myself. So I'll ask you, is that what you want? A bubble of rage expanded within Sakura. For the first time in a long time, she could feel her blood pounding again with adrenaline. She wanted to rant and rave at the woman, though the saner and more rational part of her head told her that the actions she was contemplating could be treated as insubordination at best and treason at worst. Clenching her fist in her palms, she managed to calm down and answered in a relatively steady voice. No, Hokage-sama. Good. Tsunade clapped her hands once. In that case, you are being reassigned. You'll meet your new Jounin leader 3 days from now at the training ground 7. I don't care what you need to do to get your shit back together. Get drunk, late, or whatever it is that you kids do these days to clean your systems. I want you mission ready. Any questions? The rather blue language of the Hokage aside, she did have questions. She had a lot of questions, as a matter of fact. But she also had the feeling they wouldn't be appreciated at the moment. No, Hokage-sama. She settled for saying with as much defiance she could pack in her voice. Just for a fraction of a second she could see a hint of approval in the Hokage's gaze, but it was gone as soon as it came. In that case, you're dismissed. So, there, I did your job for you. Tsunade said to the seemingly empty room once the Chunin had left. From the shadows emerged a tall, masked, gray-haired man with his headband covering his right eye, casually leafing through a book in his hands. She really wished he had the courtesy to not read it in her presence at the very least, but it was one quirk she had tried to overlook considering what she was putting him through, not to mention Kakashi was the best shinobi in the service and had earned that much. The girl has fire, and I can see why you'd want her, the Jounin admitted, pocketing the book, though I must admit that was kinda harsh even for you. She'll get over it. Tsunade waved off his concerns nonchalantly. Don't you have somewhere to be right now? I guess I do. The man said, if you'll excuse me. And Kakashi. She called out to the back of the exiting Jounin as she went back to her paperwork, don't be late. Location, Konoha Mission Center. Naruto patiently waited his turn in the queue to submit his mission report and, more importantly, collect his paycheck. Even though, the correct term should have been wages if he was being honest. The mission was nothing more than household chore undertaken for the civilian populace, and in some cases the shinobi ones too. A shinobi of his age should have found the work degrading, and genin his age were generally looked down upon by their more successful compatriots. But he didn't mind. Work was work and money was money. After all, pride never paid bills, nor did it put food on the table. He had no family and few acquaintances, so in his opinion he did just fine. He didn't mind the work either. It was honest work and gave him a chance to be productive. His work had gained him some popularity with the clients too. Popularity, though, probably was not the right word. But he was definitely sought after. On a good day he could complete 3 missions. So he ignored the borderline condescending looks he received from the rest of the shinobi in line. Most of them were directed his way by the Jonin who were escorting their wards after a day of missions. The new genin usually kept to themselves, still soaking in the novelty of finally being given the right to be called shinobi. Their older ones stood there sulking about the deranked missions. But most of them were just too happy to be part of something bigger. Still untouched by the cruelty of their world. When his turn finally came, he was pleasantly surprised to see a familiar and friendly face at the mission desk. "Hey Naruto," the scarred but smiling face of Iruka greeted him, "Long time no see." "I'll say." Naruto returned the grin, "You got fired from the academy or something, sensei. I knew they would wear you down eventually." "As if." Iruka snorted, "After having dealt with you for so long, I have gained the resilience and patience of a mountain. You know what they say. What doesn't kill you?" Iruka and Naruto went back some way. During his academy days, Iruka had been his teacher and some might even say a mentor. One of the few people who took an active interest in his well-being. Kami knew he wasn't an easy brat to care for. He had been a devil during his younger days. His pranks kept most of the Chunin forces on their toes, Iruka included. It was funny how they became friends. It started out as intense dislike. Iruka had hated his disruptive behavior during the classes, and Naruto resented the man for being the only one to catch him and for sabotaging his pranks. It soon became a contest. A test of wills. Neither willing to break before the other. Before long the intense dislike turned to grudging respect, which turned to actual respect, and the rest, as they say, is history. Yeah, Naruto conceded, but seriously. "Why are you here?" "Survival training," came the reply. "Ah. Ran." "Nope. Suzume." That explains it. Ever since its inception, the academy held mock survival training sessions in and around the training grounds surrounding the village. It was led by the Chunin instructors. It could last anywhere between a few days to a couple of weeks. Naruto remembered these times somewhat more fondly than the others. It also explained Iruka's presence here. With no classes to teach, he had been assigned to the mission desk. Though Naruto knew it was more likely that he volunteered. "Hey! People are waiting here," shouted one of the disgruntled Chunin in the queue. "Hold your horses, will you?" Iruka shouted back, before shooting Naruto an apologetic look. Taking this as his cue, Naruto handed over his mission reports. "We should catch up sometime." Iruka continued handing Naruto his paycheck. "Yeah, we should," Naruto agreed. "Can't wait to tell you all about the excitement my last mission entailed when I stubbed my toe while painting a fence. Speaking of which, you wouldn't happen to have any C ranks for me, would you? You know you need a full genin team. And a jonin instructor." "Yeah, I know. I had to try." Iruka must have picked up on his dejection despite his attempts to hide it, and his next words confirmed it. "Tell you what. Why don't you meet me for lunch tomorrow? That will give you the chance to brag about the Chunin exams you participated in." "I don't know," Naruto muttered noncommittally. "I'll be buying Ichiroku's at 1. "Fine. Now get out of here, brat, before you start a riot at the queue." Naruto laughed good-naturedly as he walked out of the room, feeling better than he did when he walked in. "Senpai." A female voice came from somewhere behind him. Naruto paid it little mind. He wanted to get home, fix some dinner and go to sleep. Maybe he should make a trip to Ichiroku's. He hadn't seen Teiuchi and Ayame in a while. "Senpai." But then again, he would be having lunch there tomorrow. So seeing his friends could wait. But he was really craving ramen right now. "Senpai." The voice called out again. This time a lot closer than before. Now Naruto was beginning to get annoyed at this nameless senpai ignoring this girl. But before he could turn around, an arm wrapped itself around his own and turned him around to come face to face with a familiar face. "Miyuki!" he exclaimed on seeing the girl who for the last 30 seconds had been trying to get his attention. "Hey!" The girl's face was flushed. "I thought you were ignoring me." "Yeah, sorry about that," Naruto apologized, running his hand through his hair. "I just wasn't expecting anyone I knew, that's all." As far as surprises went, this was a somewhat pleasant one. A few months ago in the Chunin exams held in Iwa, Naruto had been asked to be a part of her team to replace a teammate who had somehow managed to break his ass during a deranked mission. Naruto still wasn't sure if it was funny that someone got hurt during a deranked or tragic because it happened more often than one would imagine. But he had bonded with the girl during the exams and she had picked up a mild case of hero worship for him. "We just came back from a C rank," she said once the initial pleasantries had been exchanged. "Sensei and the guys are at the mission desk submitting the report." "That's great." Naruto fought down a pang of jealousy at her words. "So are you guys participating in the next exams?" Miyuki shook her head. "Sensei thinks we should gain some more experience and skills before we attempt again, seeing how the last one went. If you hadn't been there we would have been dead for sure." Naruto nodded. It was true. He did save their lives. But they believed that he saved them from a team of Iwaambu. That wasn't exactly true. They were being hunted, but it wasn't by a team of Ambu. There was only one in the team that attacked them. The rest were more than likely just your run-of-the-mill Chunin. Which was a good thing, otherwise things might have gotten a little hairy. They had underestimated him, which factored in him dispatching them fairly easily. But he really didn't mind her thinking that. After all, what is an exaggerated tale or two without a couple of embellishments? "There you are," a male voice interrupted their conversation. "We wondered where you'd gone." "Hey Naruto." Naruto recognized the new arrival as Katashi, the other member of his temporary team. He raised a hand acknowledging him. Katashi walked up to them holding what looked like a paycheck. "I did ask to be excused," Miyuki scowled, obviously annoyed at being interrupted. "I just came to hand you your check," Katashi defended himself, a little nonplussed at hostility emanating from the girl. "Also, Sensei is treating us to dinner, would you like to join us?" The question was obviously meant for Naruto and the boy was obviously being polite. Naruto was about to refuse. "Do join us, senpai," Miyuki chimered in. "I'm sure Sensei would like to speak with you too." Well, that changed things. On the one hand, Naruto was sure while their sensei probably would like to talk to him. The Jonin had after all enlisted him to allow his team to participate in the exams. They probably won't appreciate doing that in front of their genin. Definitely not while he would be mooching off of them in a team gathering. Still, it was a free meal, and Naruto felt he deserved a meal at the very least for his troubles. He was about to open his mouth to accept, when there was another interruption, this time by a Jonin. And not just any Jonin. Most people in Konoha would say he was the Jonin. "Mama Miyuki-san, I would beg you to consider postponing your dinner plans with Naruto-kun," the Jonin addressed the genin. "I'm afraid I've to borrow him with regards to a matter of some urgency. You don't mind, do you?" The sudden unexpected arrival of the Jonin had left the younger genin tongue-tied. Naruto didn't blame them. Even by the standards of Jonin, the man's appearance was unsettling. And despite the polite tenor of his voice and words, it was obvious he wasn't asking for permission. Excellent," he said as if the matter was settled. "Shall we?" He addressed Naruto. Naruto sighed helplessly. "Sorry guys, guess I'll have to take a rain check on that dinner. Maybe next time." Naruto followed the man outside the mission center and soon fell into a step beside him. Soon the two of them were traversing through the Konoha market. It was a Wednesday. The traders sold their wares at reduced prices compared to the rest of the week. So it was a busier than usual. "You know you just cost me a free meal, right?" Naruto said, more than a little annoyed at the Jonin. "Technically free meals don't cost anything," came the witty reply. "Yeah. I'm out of here," Naruto said, turning to walk away. "Mama, that was just a joke, Naruto-kun," the man said, placating the blonde genin. "But I've to ask, aren't you curious as to why I sought you out?" Naruto was curious, all right, extremely so as a matter of fact. But he also knew conversations like this were like a game of poker, and they held stakes. His curiosity versus whatever purpose the man needed him for. His ignorance of the said purpose was both a strength and a weakness. On the one hand, whatever Kakashi had to say could definitely of use to him. On the other hand, it could also lead to a situation he wouldn't be able to walk out of if he didn't do it now. "Does it have something to do with my next meal?" Naruto quipped. "Thought so." Naruto continued on his way. "I wish you a good night." Naruto was feeling rather pleased with himself, before the Chunin brought him crashing down. I could always order you to follow me, the man said in his trademark lazy drawl. Naruto froze in his tracks. He hadn't thought of that. The Chunin could indeed do that. He probably knew this might happen. Judging from his smug smile, not that he could see it behind his mask. The crinkling of his lone visible eye was indication enough though, he probably wanted it to happen. You wouldn't, Naruto tried to salvage some pride, but it was obvious he was only making things worse. The man however continued to regard him with his benign gaze, not bothering to even reply. Naruto sighed in defeat, before once again falling in a step besides the man. You don't challenge a royal flush to a show of hands with a lousy pair after all. Gotta know when to fold them after all. So where are we going? Well, it is time for dinner. I was hoping you could join me. Naruto couldn't recall wanting to punch a man more in his life. To say he was impressed would be an understatement. The man might be an A-grade jerk, but he certainly wasn't a cheapskate. The restaurant he had been led to was one of those expensive posh types. Neon blue lights lit up the entrance. Judging by the way the uniformed escort greeted Kakashi, it was obvious that he was a regular here. Considering how he was able to simply jump the queue outside, he must be one of the patrons. A dark-haired pretty woman probably in her 20s dressed in a blue flower-patterned kimono led them to a table near the back end of the restaurant. Once they were seated, Kakashi placed his order, before gazing at Naruto to do the same. Naruto was hoping to get some ramen. But he needed to get some payback on the man who had dragged him here. So he ordered 3 of the most expensive dishes on the menu. If it bothered the Chunin, he didn't show it. The server left, but not before placing a bottle of warm sake on the table. The Chunin poured some out in a saucer and offered it to Naruto before pouring some out for himself. May the will of fire burn brightly in you. The man raised his saucer, toasting Naruto. And may it have ignited 100 more before going out. Naruto finished the ritual, before throwing the drink down his throat. He winced at the burn of the alcohol as it went down. It was strong stuff. He wasn't a great drinker and wasn't particularly fond of the drink either. But he endured. Somewhere in the back of his mind he wondered how on earth did the Chunin drink it without removing his mask. He must have missed it. His saucer was empty, and he was now pouring a second round. You aren't going to kill me, are you? Naruto queried. No. Why would I want to kill you? I don't know. What would an elite Chunin want with a washed-out genin? Touché. So, back to my original question. What do you want, Hatake-san? Naruto was through playing games. He simply folded his hands in front of his face and studied the man. So I'm assuming you do know me? Yes, Naruto knew the man. Even among the Chunin, the man was an elite. The cream of the crop, so to speak. A hero in the last war, his exploits during and after the war had made him a legend. Though not yet 30, the man had survived through everything a shinobi possibly could and more. There was a legend that the man once cut through a bolt of lightning with his jutsu. Rumor had it that he was being considered for the post of Hokage after the demise of the Sandaime, before it finally went to Tsunade Senju. Only by reputation. Kakashi inclined his head in acknowledgement of Naruto's unsaid praise. What do you know of Team 7, Naruto-kun? He asked. There was a pause in the conversation as their server appeared with their food. Once she left, with a hasty itadakimasu, Naruto dug in with gusto. He was hungry, and Kakashi was paying. It was no ramen, but it sure as hell was close. So for the next few minutes the conversation was halted as he inhaled his food. If Kakashi was offended by his table manners, he didn't show it. No more than anyone else. Naruto said modestly between bites. Actually he knew more than most people, being something of a fanboy when it came to the Kage of the Leaf. It was the one aspect of his theoretical education he excelled at, going above and beyond the standard textbooks provided at the academy. I know it used to be the single greatest shinobi unit in Konoha. They were known to enforce the will of the Hokage under his/her direct authority, and also produced future candidates. Loved by their people and feared everywhere else. Right you are. Kakashi said, sounding pleased. Since the time of Nidaime-sama, Team 7 has served as the arm of the Hokage. As you no doubt know, the Sandaime, Yandaime and even the Godaime have been products of this team. Despite not quite sure where Kakashi was going with this, Naruto found himself enjoying the conversation. The place had a nice ambience, the food was heavenly, and he was listening to stories of legends by arguably the greatest living shinobi in Konoha. There were worse ways to spend an evening. Over time, however, this institution collapsed. The Chunin continued, the last Team 7 was disbanded over 15 years ago. Why was that? Naruto couldn't help asking. I'm sure it wasn't over anything important, Kakashi said nonchalantly. I don't know, sounds pretty important to me. The point is, Kakashi kept talking ignoring Naruto's query, the Hokage believes it is time Team 7 was reinstated. This time under me. That was all very interesting, Naruto had to admit, he just wasn't sure why he was being told this. Is that why you threw this party? Naruto spread his arms indicating the impressive spread of food remaining on the table. I'm sure congratulating you would be the right sentiment, but I must confess I feel rather sorry for you, if I'm the only one you had in your guest list. I'm afraid you misunderstand me, Uzumaki-san. Kakashi said. This dinner isn't celebratory, it's business. Now Naruto never considered himself among the brightest Konoha had to offer. His current rank and station were the perfect indicators of that. But street smarts were something he prided himself on. The smarts he had earned from the school of hard knocks. Those instincts of his were now working overtime as he pieced everything together. That's right, Uzumaki-san, Kakashi said, correctly interpreting the look of dawning comprehension on Naruto's face. I'm here to recruit you. The piece of unagi between the two chopsticks didn't seem to make its way to his mouth. He replaced the chopsticks back on his plate, as he stared hard at Kakashi, all cheerfulness gone. Is this a joke? He demanded. I assure you I have never been more serious. Kakashi assured him, his tone graver than it had been all night. Why on earth would you want a genin washout in a team which has been known to churn out legends? Naruto remarked, if these are the standards we're setting, I'd be really worried for Konoha. You seem to have a remarkably low opinion of your skills, Kakashi countered, and of me as well if you think I didn't do my homework on you. You were after all Jiraiya's apprentice. Naruto held the gaze of Kakashi's lone eye, ignoring the stab of pain in his heart at the mention of his old sensei's name and focusing on the implications of the words. Only one other knew of his association with the now dead Chunin, and Kakashi coming here meant he was in their confidence. But he chose to hold his silence for now, letting the man speak. During his years of travel, Jiraiya had managed to create the most sophisticated information network the Elemental Nations has ever seen, Kakashi said, a network which served Konoha well, while he was alive. A network which now lies dormant. So that's why you want me? You're the only one alive who knows how it operates. That confirmed it. A big game was afoot here and the stakes were high. The network Jiraiya had painstakingly created was totally independent of the official Konoha network. The sheer complexity and intricacy of the thing was an art in itself. He had hoped it would never be needed. Believe it or not, in some ways you'll be the most important part of this team, Kakashi said gravely, it's not a bad gig. You'll formally be a part of a team, running high-ranked mission, not to mention a chance to rise through the ranks. Naruto could hardly believe what he was hearing. Barely an hour ago he was lamenting his luck for being unable to go on higher-ranked missions, and now he was being asked to be a part of the greatest one Eve. Well, potentially anyway. There were concerns, a lot of them in fact, but at the moment he couldn't bring himself to care. He was about to be part of a team. That was all that mattered. In that case. Naruto closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were shining with their usual mirth. How can I refuse? So when do I meet the rest of the team? Actually, the team isn't complete yet. Kakashi's tone reverted back to its cheerful tenor. As your first assignment, I need you to recruit the last member. Me. Naruto blinked owlishly at Kakashi as he registered his words. Why on earth would you want me to do that? Because Naruto-kun, I believe you are the best man for the job. Kakashi handed the bewildered genin a folder. Naruto opened it with some trepidation. His eyes widened when he studied its contents. No way. Character profile. Sasuke Uchiha. Affiliation, Konoha. Registration ID, 0896. Rank, Chunin, Hunternin, formerly. Teams, Team 5, formerly, Team 7, current. Bio, Sasuke Uchiha is the last of his extremely feared martial clan the Uchiha after his elder brother in a fit of madness murdered his entire clan down to the last child, except for Sasuke. Vowing vengeance, he patiently awaits the day when he can finally make his brother pay for his crimes. Graduated the academy at the age of 12 at the top of his class and becoming Chunin at the age of 13 on his first try at the Chunin exams held in Suna. He eventually went on to join the Black Ops, where he distinguished himself as a man who completed his missions without any collateral damage. A feat matched only by Hatake Kakashi, his mentor. Considered a genius on par with Hatake Kakashi and Hiruzen Sarutobi, he is well on his way to more glory. That's it for part 1. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.